I can't imagine that there was plenty, and still even is, a good sum of little hidey holes all throughout Rapture. That's actually been something that I very much appreciate about things like the Underdark in various settings, any kind of extensive network of tunnels and solids, such that you don't have immediate visibility on who and what is in a given area. It's actually going to be quite a significant portion of what's coming with my first setting, Thonica. What we're looking at here is the proper order of ascent for the threefold manifold ability scores. We have here P for physique, recognized as niched, specialized, modularized, generalized, and universalized. What these are the total levels of our ability score. As we covered it last time, all of the points that can be acquired in the power, process, and precision ultimately add up into the physique stat. That stat comes out to 1 of 5, in addition to any scope that we might apply to it. I didn't take note of it before, but I sure would hate if every single time I tried to use this plasmid, I suddenly had gaping hand wounds from icicles that apparently disappear as soon as you stop channeling it. You know, I haven't really paused to think about it very much. How exactly are plasmids called upon? Is it genuinely just directly like magic in your standard RPG? Or is it something a little bit more involved? Because it is supposed to be genetic. Surely there's some sort of biologic process that goes into it other than me think bigly.
Figured we'd all be part of Ryan's great chain. Turns out Ryan's chain is made of gold, and ours are the sort with the big iron ball around your ankle. Fontaine's promising something better. He's like one of us, you know? Like he's worked a day in his life. Not like things could get a lot worse.
That's a perfect microcosm of the inevitable result of populism. The appeal simply to the common people. It always comes up in these kind of aristocratically oriented societies. No matter how potentially good a system can be under its prevailing aristocracy, that there is a comparative surplus which some in-group possesses, it will always drive forward a profound desire to meet them, to accrue the same amount, to experience the same extent. That was satisfying. Rare W for the guns in this game. Niched is limited. That which is specialized is more free and available to abide more environs and more situations. That which is modularized has multiple specialized components in and of itself. This is generally where most things on the level of macroscopic animals will dwell. Think all of the individual specialized and niched cells and organelles that compose a human, for instance. That which is generalized is better able to survive in just about any environment. In a very small scope, yet still following the principle. Water bears, tardigrades, are able to exist in even the most extreme environments with relative ease. That which is universalized is something that is able to either adapt its very physique to any given situation, encompassing all of the previous and building up, or is independent of any resources that it cannot itself produce. Is dead. You can stop. You can quit.
Unsanitary in here.
Did you just shock the daylights out of Well done. It is something to me that even despite all of the nonsense that's happening here in Rapture proper, these machines not only work, but we just don't break into them. I promise you, if I were put in this place, I would be tipping them, smashing them, crashing them, whatever it takes. Who's gonna stop me? The I here stands for intercatenation, the fixed, variable, adaptive, central, and dispersed ratings. The fixed rating indicates that a subject is a static routine, like a microchip-based circuit board. That which is variable has some opportunity to make some decisions based upon contextual circumstance. Think perhaps an algorithmic machine. That which is adaptive is more correlative to an artificial intelligence, a neural network, something that is central, has all of the options of the previous bundled in and able to be called upon as the situation demands, like humans. And that which is dispersed has several centralities, perfusing a physique where there is no mass entity that is responsible for one's intercatenation, and rather it is able to draw upon many different centralities to the ends of resolving a singular function. No, I promise you did not spook me. Freddy Krueger looking head ass.
You've had your fun, but enough is enough. If you press that button, you'll learn what it means to truly be my enemy.
Well, I don't have much choice now, do I? Furthering the point, the exact response that Andrew Ryan had there to the threat of my aiding one of his opponents, avowed as he might be, the coercion of force to any individual will inevitably result in either full submission, which is not likely for one with their own exercise of will by habit, or utter rebellion. And once utter rebellion is struck, it's very easy to persuade others that one's position of authority is either not warranted or at minimum desirable, no matter the real position of the popular individual. Mm-hmm. A rose to my sweet. For the stat of metataxes, you have that which is introduced, extraduced, introduced, transduced, and ultraduced. That which is introduced pulls in the necessary forms, matters, and domains that enables it to exist. That which is extraduced is able to push out at least forms, although it may not have its own matter, to maintain physique or intercatenation. That which is introduced is something that is between all of these. It may have some of its own form and some of its own matter, but ultimately it does not have its own domain. That which is transduced is not only in possession of its own matters and forms, but also its own domain. And finally, that which is ultraduced is as the panatrivium itself. It stands by itself, of itself, and for itself, not contingent upon any matters, forms, or domains whatsoever. Ah, nothing like glue. Now, if only I could find a brown paper bag. The smuggler's hideout was an important piece in connecting the overall story. It finally put all of the activity that we had been up to into a single moment. Finally, that climax, the reaching of a conclusion to the initial thread that got us from the Welcome to Rapture Metro all the way to the smuggler's hideout. In that, there was a tremendous amount of strife, a great deal of emotional attachment to the characters for whom which we have some amount of common humanity, especially with the presentation that Atlas has been given in relation to his love for Moira in particular, and finally, the loss that we experience, if you have any amount of empathy or sympathy really, that comes from it, only to be pushed forward into greater and greater unknowns in a place as narrow, claustrophobic, and abyssal as this. Well, I whiffed that. Let's see if we can do better. Yeah, where'd you go? I'd like to take your photo. in relation to having the main set of die for the threefold manifold TTRPG, I would argue there's a great deal of value in using 2d10s versus the more common d20 or even multiple d6 method. Ultimately, you can use them not only as individual sets of 10 for whatever you may need to roll, including something perhaps like damage or the resistance that you're making against a given effect, but also the ability to roll it as in simulating a D100. And if there's anything that I believe we as players and as game masters have the innate ability to ratio and come to a decision on, it's not a scale of D20s, it's not a scale of D6s, it's that exchange puts the full weight of the dichotomy betwixt the vision and the corporeal. It is so terribly easy for those with grand visions to ignore everything that gets in their way. In fact, it's the very engine by which they attain such capacity to produce monumental accomplishments. But in the same turn, it is also something by which the people who are participant must struggle in, around, and under. An edifice of form has ligatures unto themselves of the average individual's livelihood, especially whenever id and irrational self-interest is put to the fore by the visionary versus the corporeal, the everyman. When spiced with spite, there is bound to be a dialectic of bloodshed. And yet at once, as Andrew Ryan himself explains, this is all his vision. Looking at the advantage and disadvantage increments, these are intended to abide alongside the given ability score. As you may be able to read, the higher your score, going point by point, you are given an increasing or decreasing increment of 10 added to the result of your rolls. You're trying to get as close as possible to 100 to achieve a given effect. And if you have more in a particular ability score that you're rolling on the point of, you will come closer to accomplishing the given task more consistently each and every time. This is a genuinely beautiful area as well. A graveyard under the sea. I don't think you can get more phantasmal than that, really. Oh, and look at that. They did actually put some 3D models of buildings and wires out there. Ah, along with some animals. Recognizing the significance of the panels they wish to put here for effect of God rays if this were a real place, but also the strict game design aspects. In addition to our very first introduction to this area being the double great chains attached to the sides of a mausoleum, it makes it evident that the perspectives which are upheld by the great chain is one of death, static and unchanging, resistant to all development and evolution. And that is continued on with rolling at top or bottom percentile allows plus or minus 10 extra / intra on final roll. Can repeat more than once a roll. Roll extra intra with 1d10 above or below 100% range makes for something commensurately game-changing or plus minus that can be banked. That's my idea of the inspiration system and critical successes or critical failures sort of rolled into one. This definitely requires a lot more expounding in the final version for the mechanic itself. But the core idea here is that the closer you get to 100% or 0, the closer you are to making a critical success or a critical failure. If you have a critical success, the increments of 10 determine how much more, or on the flip side, less you succeed in a given action, reaction, or interaction.
Seems like some players have started seeing ghosts. Ghosts? Ryan tells me it's a side effect of this plasmid business. One poor sod's memory is getting passed on to another through genetic sampling.
Mimetic implantation by genetics is a fascinating idea, something that we've seen touched on in things even like Metal Gear Solid, made explicit in Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, and very much something that I believe deserves more attention. As memetics, memory, the genes of the spirit, are in and of themselves infinitely important, for no one exists apart from the social web by which we have attained such a lineage. You push past 100, you will have your payoff in increments of 10. If you have 110 as your final score, it will make a resounding success, 120, spectacular success that not only bleeds into what you rolled for, but also the results of your tremendous success. 130, not only will the thing itself be accomplished drastically well, but the situation of the story can shift around such a pivotal success. And besides that, if you get above 100% and you want to maybe save that for something more important to you, rather than say, I rolled to make a ham sandwich, it acts something like inspiration, mechanically, rather than purely on the basis of what your game master might feel is important or not.
Slugs alone could not provide enough atom for serious war. The first home for little sisters will open.
I just gotta stop by the thrifty care to pick up a med hypo. Word is, this ain't Angelina's first visit to the T-Guard.
Well, that's one way to get Atom. Between the administration of the Atom Slugs unto the Little Sisters, and the obvious commodification and casualization of sex, it speaks to the marketization of even the most intimate parts of the human experience, depriving them from the recognition of them as singular, and therefore of infinite value unto themselves, in juxtaposition with the utter dissolution of autonomy in a real sense, where every single interaction as such is not measured any longer as a singular unit, but instead as a mere part of a quantitative sequence of valuation. And now looking at it, we have the scale. The basis of it was the regular grid, because while having free measurements, like with the measuring tape, is a really good idea, and there's even some implementation of that in virtual tabletops, as far as I understand it, the overwhelming majority of people still prefer a grid system just for the straightforward simplicity of it. As much as I do enjoy hex grids, and I think that they are superior for many kinds of balancing resolutions and considerations, a simple 1 meter by 1 meter base, as where we start at, is just really easy by comparison. And I choose the meter and the metric system on the basis that it is not only very intuitable as to how each and every measurement stacks if you have even a passing familiarity with it, but also it's international. It's everywhere. Even in the United States, we have metric labels on just about everything. Of all the things in Rapture, I didn't anticipate to see the Green Man being represented. Oh, what up? Putting the introduction of the Houdini Splicer in, as they have here, as a free agent with more wit than the average individual, also makes the encounters to come feel more original, like there is a real place and a mode of operation that these splicers have carved out for themselves. There had to be a certain cutoff point where something is so small that it's not even really meaningful to represent it on a grid, to something that is so big that it becomes something that a grid is placed on itself. And that is why we have this as microscopic, to account for that threshold, and finally environmental, to account for the upper threshold. The scale itself is intended to be comparative. For instance, if an amoeba is attempting to push against a house cat, the amoeba is definitely not winning. And likewise, if an entire battleship attempts to make a counter of precision against a fly, it's not comparable. It would not be exactly a fair fight, so you would anticipate there to be some commensurate reduction in their efficacy if it's even considered possible at all. And so necessarily there would need to be some kind of restriction.
Today, our
Arcadia was closed off to all but paying customers. Ryan asked, should a farmer not be able to sell his food? Is a potter not entitled to a profit from his pots? I started to argue with the man, and then I remembered who signed my checks. The only thing worse than a hypocrite is an unemployed one.
As I say, when you turn an economic eye to every single instance of life, you inevitably find yourself entrapped within it, where no action becomes one simply of humanity, of will individually. Every single piece of experience that exists, you will inevitably find yourself on the brink, if not the fruition, of turning each and every choice into one of syntactic budgeting. You probably noticed a little bit of marginalia up here too. I was trying to, while working on the things to the left of it, combine the benefits of the hook in a karambit with the virtues of a thrusting blade. I definitely don't think that either suffices, but it is something that I would like to continue researching and creating at least some basic designs for. If you have any ideas, or this exists already, please let me know. I do wonder how they managed to get plants that are resilient to all of the dim lighting that is being provided by these very, very insignificant skylights in the ceiling. My best guess, especially with those down here, at least attempting to explain a level design decision, is that they must be lamp plants. They're not often considered because they are so obscure by the very nature of them, but they're plants that have adapted to places with lower intensities of light, as in the wavelengths are further away from ultraviolet light. And after just getting the broadest sweeps of our inventory's categories put down, I started to take some time to organize them into their own separate sets. To start with, we have the gross aspects. That's the physic, intercatenic, metataxic, point, propagation, and area, passive, triggered, and active. The physic accounts for the born, mechanic, and powered, percussive, divisive, and disruptive, light, medium, and heavy. The intercatenic accounts for the automatic, perceptual, rational, pacifying, altering, and aggressing, covert, communicative, and overt. The metataxic includes the microtaxic, mesotaxic, macrotaxic, accidental, coincidental, and substantial, linguistic, logic, and metaphysic, where the net takes up the weight, work, and worth, passive, persistent, or permanent, and static, starting, or stopless. And let's dig into each of these.
On the surface, I once bought a forest. The parasites claimed that the land belonged to God and demanded that I establish a public park there. Why? So the rabble could stand slack-jawed under the canopy and pretend that it was paradise earned. Congress moved to nationalize my forest and burnt it to the ground. God did not plant the seeds of this Arcadia. I did.
That's a hellaciously spiteful position to take. Understandable for the fact that you are the one who invested all of the resources into it, and therefore you have a significant stake in it. But that can lead to some heinous results if you were to universally apply that. Especially when that destruction does come at the consequence of many another thing. That which is gross takes into account the overall notion, how exactly it operates, if at all. The physic, intercatenic, and metataxic is the same as put down above. Concreteness, abstractness, or objective. That which occupies a point is perhaps a bead, a grain of sand, a very small, self-contained entity. Propagation more fits like a bag of sand, a bag of ball bearings, a jar of some kind of fluid, or a can of compressed gas. And something that covers an area is more like a cloud, a board, a garment. That which is passive does not do anything purposive by itself. That which is triggered does have a mechanism to do something. And finally, that which is active is self-directing.
There has been tremendous pressure to regulate this plasmid business. There have been side effects, blindness, insanity, death. But what use is our ideology if it is not tested? The market does not respond like an infant. The market is patient, and we must be too.
When we look at the results of any given market, There is a panoply of positions one may take. I am generally of the opinion that the aims of any policy ought to be a reflection of reality. And if the reality is such that there is an obvious confluence of negative consequences, then a commensurate response should be taken. I do not consider it merely a subjective opinion to state that there should be rational responses to evident concerns in a market. The physic group, updating and modifying the category of wielded, we have born. This means that whatever its purpose is, demands an organism to employ it by manual force. Something that is mechanic relies upon gross physic laws to accomplish its ends, and that which is powered uses either historic methods or something like electricity or steam in order to fulfill its design. The percussive, divisive, and disruptive. Something percussive is intended to hit something, and that be its primary means of effect. Something that is divisive relies upon cutting, chopping, slashing, or piercing. Something disruptive attacks the structure of a thing either through chemic, thermal, or some other transformative process. In the light, medium, heavy range, something that is light is ultimately put together in a way that is atypically minimalized in terms of its base prototype. Something that is medium fits that prototype within a fairly regular tolerance, and something that is heavy is more on the maximal side. We all make choices, but in the end, our choices make us. That's quite a profound line coming from the rather consequence-disregarding ideology of laissez-faire capitalism. If you're going to truly commit yourself to that axiom, you have to recognize as an existential fact that every decision is necessarily based upon the options that are to hand. When those options limit the individual from participating in the idyllic manner, and the pursuit of self-preservation is instinctive in the overwhelming majority of a species, then there is need for supplementation if you wish to maintain the maximal amount of liberty, and therefore break from the laissez-faire element of laissez-faire capital. The intercatenic group accounts for computational or psychologic effects that might be a part of an object's purpose. The automatic applies to the innate characteristics that are a part of such a system. The perceptual modifies any of these signifiers that might be received by an interpreter, and the rational interacts directly with the logic or reasoning of a subject. The pacifying, altering, and aggressing range, that which pacifies, sedates, soothes the activity that is targeted. That which alters might blend pacifying and aggressing in order to modify the path of its target. That which is aggressing seeks to raise up the targeted activity or process. The covert, communicative, and overt. That which is covert is ultimately attempting to not be noticed. That which is communicative may not be trying to gain the attention or hide itself, but rather to enable some sort of back and forth. And that which is overt is attempting to make itself the center of attention. The story of the you invent, though, intrigues me. I wonder if it came about in response to the abundance of random scraps and gained popularity amongst the common individual, because I can't imagine or foresee anyone of the upper class coming down here to throw together remanufactured bits. The metataxic group circumscribes anything that might have a relation to panatrivial substance. The range of microtaxic, mesotaxic, and macrotaxic corresponds to whether something is predominantly material, formal, or object. The accidental, coincidental, and substantial range. Something accidental is just a product of greater processes. Something that is coincidental is one such process. And something that is substantial, the actual root of such processes. The linguistic, logic, and metaphysic. A linguistic object is an application of dialectophores in the mode of language. A logic application puts them in formulaic method, and a metaphysic application combines both linguistic and logic elements to convey physic properties. You know, I was thinking about it earlier. I imagine the justification for using a wrench in specific is probably so that we can do this. That's another bit of weaving in the game mechanics to the aesthetic and the presentation. The net group accounts for all of the details of the previous. The weight, work, and worth range looks at the top level of the object. Something's weight is its mass, something's work is its energy value, and something's worth is its gramoscalar value. The passing, persistent, and permanent range relays how long something is around. Here, a passing object is something that comes and goes with great haste. It's momentary. Something that is persistent, sticks around for a good long time, enough to be employable in general operations, and something that is permanent is bound through metaphysic law. The stationary starting and stopless range connotes whether an object is mobile by itself. A stationary object, unsurprisingly, stands still. A starting object may move at certain intervals, increments, or prompts, but is otherwise static. And something that is stopless, like perhaps photons, is purely kinetic. It is entirely impossible to square away the idea of total ownership of property, as if Rapture itself were simply the household of Mr. Andrew Ryan, and then at once hand the reins to anybody as though it were a nation-state. More than anything, I believe that the failings of Rapture are not economic, are not environmental. I think it's perhaps ideologic, in that the contrariety of vision is maintained as though it were a virtue. Either it is or it isn't a nation-state. If it is a nation-state, you must account for the fact that humanity is humanity, with its own specific nature, and if it is simply private property, then none of this is for anything but the strict luxury of Andrew Ryan. All parts are mere vanity. Insofar as what we have covered today in our notes for the Threefold Manifold tabletop role-playing game, we have elucidated some of the base notions that have went into leveling the topmost ability scores of physique, intercatenation, and metataxis. We have discussed the decision for what kind of dice, 2d10, that we will be using, an analog towards inspiration, critical success, and critical failure. A banking system, therefore, gridding and scaling an environment, maps, and creatures on the basis of a universal metric, a little side project I did with just drawing some weapons ideas, and categorizing all of the things that can go into one's inventory based upon their actual characteristics, the ideas that spawned them, and their refinements as we began to polish it into something that could actually be employed per a gameplay rule set. This particular piece has ideas of technocracy baked right into it. If techno-anarchism, fully autonomous technologic solutions by way of markets, is your idea of a solution to the very real consequences of products, you are guaranteeing that every single difficulty, trial, issue that your citizen may face, that others who are not mere means to an end but ends in themselves, even per the base ideology that Andrew Ryan is building upon, will be at the absolute whim of whoever is on the scene first. It's strict opportunism. Once more clarifying that ideologic contradiction. Mutate.
Leaves and call themselves the Saturnine. Please. They drink human blood and chant, harness the flame, harness the mist.
Well, that explains exactly what we were looking at before. There is no sense of consistency, merely the identification of oneself with the powers of plasmids. That does invoke some curiosity about how the seeming appearance of all sorts of specters plays into the faith of the Saturnine. What are these masks? I wish we could determine more from the effigies that they have, correlating it with the various zodiac signs on the walls, alongside the alcohol and chlorophyllic solutions. And that they seem to be hanging, covered in blood. It makes one wonder, is this supposed to be some sort of sacrificial fetish? Or is it perhaps more intended that the feminine aspect be sacrificed?
Who says you can't teach an old hound new tricks? This batty plant woman spends 4 years coming up with ways to defoliate trees in the Pacific to scare out the Jap. And now here I am, down at the bottom of the Atlantic, trying to figure out how to do the same thing in reverse.
One of the virtues of this whole story is the fact that even the supposed heroines of it, those who are at least on your side as you can perceive it, are themselves quite dubious. Rather than simply painting the allies you might gain as black or white, good or bad, they're very much of the time, very much furnished by the same reality that you dwell in, instead of apart from it, strictly heroic by our own standards, and yet quite efficacious and even able to be put to your ends. That's admirable. Tapping not only the capacity to build out one's genetic code from the ground up, but to even defeat death itself is indisputable evidence of the brilliance that knowledge can bring about. And yet, as we experience it, it is impossible not to take note of that recurring theme of the Great Chain, as it sweeps people to and fro, changes the very substrate upon which life itself is dependent. Yet in every aspect of life, there is a certain amount of adaptation, socially, interpersonally, biologically, that is required for stability, coherency, longevity, while there is space for the boundless potentiality that our species is capable of. It is impossible to ignore, to act in spite of, such fundamental realities. Sylvan Wonderland, place to get away. They utilize surface imagery, and also the imagery of myth, in a place that is intended to be fully free from such limitations. Another curious contradiction. Once more, whoever was putting in the design and narrative direction very clearly had a strong sense of purpose. As far as Arcadia goes, before we were to move into the market, it has been an experience of a verdant wilderness, blended inexorably with the advent of technology, the true bringing to the knees of evolutionary life, to the pursuits and advents of mankind. And in that, just as swiftly as it is put into place, it is able to be taken away, and not only that, but the very creator herself put to the axe. The tale that is spun herein is one of creation and destruction in equal measure. Easy come, easy go. As far as Bioshock Remastered itself, the whole game is a masterpiece in philosophy, at least, and overall social commentary on the forces and sources of humankind's interventions, not only amongst themselves, but also with reality as an instrument. The consequences that these can summon, and the inevitabilities that those consequences bring about. Social, economic, technologic, covers it all. And that is an ambitious project that cannot be understated, not only in regards to its material as itself, but also upon humanity, if one should stop to consider it.